The inheritance of hunger, the will, and the whispers. The drive out to rural New England was long, tedious, and saturated with the thick, suffocating air of unspoken resentment. Liam and Chloe hadn't seen their grandmother Elara in almost a decade, and they had unwillingly been in the same car together for nearly as long. They were only united now by a lawyer's terse phone call and the promise of property. A vast, dilapidated farmhouse that had been in the family since before the Great Depression. Liam, the older by 2 years, drove with a tense, hungry silence. He was rail-thin, with a restless energy that often made him seem brittle, and his dark eyes constantly scanned the horizon, searching for something he couldn't name. He saw the inheritance as a lifeline, a clean break from his dead-end job and the suffocating debts of city life. Chloe, meanwhile, stared out the window, watching the landscape decay from familiar suburbs into something wilder and more shadowed. She remembered the few childhood visits to Elara's house as flashes of oppressive quiet, dust motes dancing in shafts of weak light, and the perpetual, faint smell of something earthy and metallic, like rusted blood. She was a pragmatist, an artist who worked in digital mediums. She wanted to liquidate the house and be done with the complicated, cold history of the Carter family line. "It's a fortune, Chloe." Liam finally broke the silence, his voice tight with hope. "That land alone is worth a bomb. We sell the place, we're free. Or it's a moldering ruin that costs a fortune to demolish," Chloe countered flatly. "Did you ever stop to think why she never sold it herself? Why she lived out here completely alone for 30 years? Liam merely scoffed, pushing the car faster down the winding, overgrown dirt road. She was eccentric. Eccentricity pays well when you die. The farmhouse, when they finally arrived, was worse than Chloe had imagined. It wasn't picturesque decay. It was a sullen, hostile rot. The paint had peeled away decades ago, revealing gray, splintered wood. The porch sagged beneath the weight of years and moss. Most unsettling was the silence. Even the summer cicadas seemed to avoid the immediate vicinity of the house, leaving only the sound of their tires crunching on the gravel drive. The interior was a labyrinth of dust and shadows. It smelled of decay, dried flowers, and something indefinable. A heavy, organic musk that settled deep in the back of their throats. Every piece of furniture was covered in yellowed sheeting. The air was dead, as if breathing it had stopped being necessary decades ago. The lawyer, Mr. Silas Thorne, was already waiting at the chipped, mahogany dining table, which was cleared of dust only enough to accommodate his briefcase and a stack of papers. He was a small man with nervous eyes, dressed in a suit that looked expensive but slightly too warm for the weather. "Mr. and Ms. Carter," Thorne greeted them, his voice unnaturally loud in the silence. He seemed eager to be finished. "I appreciate you making the journey. Elara Carter's will is straightforward, for the most part." The bulk of the will was exactly what they expected. The farmhouse, the 50 acres of surrounding woodland, and a modest sum of liquid assets, all to be split equally between the two siblings. Chloe's pragmatic heart briefly soared, enough for a down payment on a decent studio apartment, at least. Then, Thorne cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "However, there is a specific, rather unusual clause pertaining to the main property." He paused, reading from a document thick with notarized stamps. "The inheritance of the estate is strictly conditional upon the immediate, continuous, and absolute maintenance of the attic garden." Liam and Chloe exchanged a bewildered look. "Attic garden?" "She had a sunroom." Liam asked. "No, Mr. Carter. The attic. The will specifies, the garden must be tended by the inheritors. It must never lack sustenance. It must never be exposed to the elements. And under no circumstances is the fortified door to the space to be breached or tampered with by any other party. Failure to adhere to these conditions for a period exceeding 7 consecutive days shall result in the immediate forfeiture of the entire estate to the American Association for Botanical Research." Thorne quickly added, "I should inform you, the ABA is very real, and very eager to acquire the property, should you fail. This clause is ironclad and non-negotiable." The words felt like a sudden, chilly draft. An attic garden? Their grandmother had never been a gardener, at least not in any traditional sense. And why the emphasis on a fortified door and sustenance? After Thorn left, hurriedly, without a proper goodbye, the siblings stood in the silent hall, the weight of the condition heavy between them. "Forget it," Chloe whispered, running a hand through her hair. "It's a trick. She was always trying to control us even after she was gone. Let the Botanical Association have their eccentric plants. It's not worth the hassle." "Wait," Liam said, his eyes now lit with that strange, hungry flicker. "What if it is worth it? What if this garden is valuable? She didn't want to give it up to the world, and now she's entrusted it to us. 50 acres, Chloe. 50 acres. The next hour was spent searching. The house offered no clues, no trowels, no sacks of potting soil. Finally, they found the access point. A narrow, rickety staircase hidden behind a loose panel in the upstairs linen closet. The air radiating from the space above felt oddly warm and humid, like a greenhouse in late summer, clashing violently with the cold deadness of the house below. They ascended slowly, each step groaning under their weight. At the top of the stairs, there was a small landing, illuminated by a single, dirty bare bulb hanging from the rafters. And there was the door. It wasn't a standard wooden attic door. It was heavy, constructed of thick, reinforced steel, secured by 3 separate iron slide bolts and a formidable, keyed padlock. The wood around the frame was scorched and warped, as if some immense heat had been applied to it long ago. Etched deeply into the steel, in their grandmother's shaky, unmistakable handwriting, was a single word: nourish. Liam, breathing hard, reached out to touch the cold metal. Why would she fortify it like this? To keep people out? Or something in? Chloe felt a knot of pure anxiety tighten in her chest. A faint, rhythmic thump sounded from beyond the door, soft but insistent, like a heavy, slow heartbeat. "Liam, listen," she hissed. "That's not a garden. That's a vault." Liam ignored her, his fingers already fiddling with the antique brass key they had found in the will's envelope. The lock clicked, the iron bolt slid back with a sickening scrape, and the humid air rushed out, carrying with it a scent that made Chloe gag, a powerful, deep smell of rich, fungal earth, overripe sweetness, and, unmistakably, fresh raw meat. Liam pushed the heavy door inward. The attic was not a dusty storage space. It was a perfectly isolated environment, a pressurized world within a world. The windows were entirely boarded over, but the space was illuminated by a sickly, pulsing violet light cast by rows of custom-built LED grow lights hanging overhead. The air was intensely hot and wet, the humidity fogging Chloe's vision immediately. But it was the garden itself that stopped them. It was centrally located, covering perhaps 20 square feet of the attic floor. There were no wooden boxes or ceramic pots. Instead, the plants grew directly from a strange, low bed of earth that wasn't earth at all. It was a dark, viscous, almost black substance, damp and glistening, and it seemed to shimmer with a low, internal warmth. The plants themselves were monstrously beautiful. They were not green. They were a vivid, pulsing spectrum of arterial reds, bruised purples, and pale, sickly yellows. Their stems were thick, segmented, and slightly rubbery, twisting like muscle tissue. One plant, tall and central, had blooms that weren't petals but delicate, lace-like membranes that trembled in the heavy air. Others looked like organs, a grouping of bulbous, heart-shaped sacs that gently contracted and expanded. There was no sound of running water, only the continued, low thumping and a subtle, unsettling sucking noise, like a hungry child feeding. "My God," Chloe whispered, stepping back until her spine hit the doorframe. "What is this?" Liam walked straight towards the centerpiece plant, drawn like a moth to the terrible purple light. His face, usually pale, was now flushed with a strange, unnatural excitement. "It's beautiful," he murmured, reaching out a trembling hand toward the segmented stem. "It's alive. Look at the health of it, Chloe." She wasn't an eccentric. She was an alchemist. His eyes fixed on the base of the plant, where the viscous black medium was dotted with small, crystalline white fragments. He knelt, leaning closer, inhaling the musky, meaty air deeply. Suddenly, a wave of profound, Bone-deep weakness hit Chloe, accompanied by a crushing sense of emptiness. It wasn't hunger, but a biological void, a sudden absence of energy, like a battery had been ripped out of her. She stumbled, clutching the doorframe to steady herself. Liam, however, stood up quickly, his eyes shining. He looked intensely vital, energized. He seemed to have absorbed the very air that had drained her. "We need to read the rest of the file," Liam said, his voice now firm, authoritative, and impatient, as if the needs of the attic had already supplanted all other concerns. "We need to know what they eat. We can't let them go hungry." Chloe looked from the pulsing, fleshy plants to her brother's suddenly radiant, yet alarmingly focused, face. The inheritance wasn't a gift of land. It was a command of servitude. And Liam, she realized with a cold stab of horror, was already succumbing to the strange, pervasive will of the garden. The inheritance of hunger, the gardener's ledger, and the butcher's bill. The humid air of the attic was now firmly woven into the house's atmosphere, a creeping, organic odor that displaced the scent of dust and rot. Chloe couldn't shake the primal terror she felt, but Liam was galvanized. The initial shock had been replaced by a manic, focused determination that shone in his eyes. "We need the ledger," he announced, striding back down the creaking stairs. She wouldn't leave a condition like this without instructions. "We have 48 hours, maybe less, before those things start deteriorating." They looked hungry. Chloe reluctantly followed. Her fear was still a physical weight in her stomach, but it was now overlaid with a more pressing dread. The fear of what Liam might become if he maintained his devotion to this hideous flora. She was already feeling the residual drain from the attic, a lingering weakness that made her bones ache. The search led them back to the dining room, where Mr. Thorne had left the will. Tucked inside the briefcase pocket that had held the key, they found it. A small, leather-bound volume that looked like a 19th century accounts book. Its pages were filled with Elara Carter's neat, spidery script. It wasn't a diary, it was a meticulous gardener's ledger. The first entries were mundane, weather notes, utility bills, but they quickly descended into the obsessive. The columns were labeled not for profit and loss, but for input, output, and vibrancy index. "Look at this," Liam whispered, tracing a finger over an entry dated 10 years prior. Input, standard butcher's cut, quantity 10 pounds. Output, average, 7, vibrancy, stable. Chloe peered closer. The output column featured not pounds, but a series of unsettling, hand-drawn symbols that looked vaguely like human organs, a kidney, a lung, a twisted length of intestine. "What is the vibrancy index?" Chloe demanded, pushing aside the visceral disgust. Liam flipped to the frontispiece. In looping, precise handwriting, Elara had included a glossary. The vibrancy index measures the return on investment. 10 is maximum vitality, temporary youth. Below 5 is rapid decay. 0 indicates forfeiture and immediate consumption of the gardener. Chloe slammed the book shut, her hands shaking. "Consumption? Liam, we are burning this house down. Now. This isn't just organic fertilizer. This is a feeding schedule for something predatory." Liam gently took the ledger back, his voice unnervingly calm. "We can't, Chloe. The will. The forfeiture clause. And what if she was right? What if she maintained this for 30 years because it was valuable? Look at the dates. She started this garden when she was nearly 70. She lived to be 95 in perfect health, completely alone. She never aged, not really. This is the source of her longevity." He turned to the core pages, the formula. The formula was a complex, handwritten recipe for the sustenance, requiring specific cuts, but more importantly, a detailed preparatory process. The key component, which Elara had underlined repeatedly in fading red ink, was listed as the catalyst, bone meal, unprocessed, and marrow. Blood, type O positive, stabilized. All components must be fresh, dense, and non-toxic. The final component must be mixed with the soil every 48 hours. The last entry in the ledger was scrawled just 3 days before Elara's death. The script slightly shaky, input reduced. Vibrancy, 3. Insufficient. Must replenish immediately. The hunger grows. Reduced input. Liam muttered, his brow furrowed. That's why she died. She couldn't maintain the full formula. The plants consumed her faster than she could feed them. Or they just grew tired of her, Chloe whispered, suddenly recalling the raw, musky scent of the attic. The immediate crisis was the 48-hour window. They had less than a day remaining before the nourish command failed. Liam grabbed the keys. We need the butcher, he stated, his decision final. The local butcher shop, the Old Mill Butcher, was located in a ramshackle building near the old river dam, 10 miles from the farmhouse. It was a place that smelled permanently of brine, sawdust, and the metallic tang of chilled meat. The butcher himself, a hulking man named Silas, no relation to the nervous lawyer, looked like he hadn't smiled since the Cold War. His apron was spotless, his eyes were cold and professional, and he didn't ask questions. We need the usual order, Liam said, trying to sound confident. Elara Carter's order. The one for the specialized needs. The butcher didn't blink. He reached beneath the counter without a word, retrieving a package wrapped in heavy, thick brown butcher paper, tied tightly with twine. It weighed far more than it looked, possessing an unsettling, almost stone-like density. She paid 6 weeks in advance, the butcher said, his voice a low, gravelly monotone. This is the final package from her last cycle. You look thinner than she did, boy. You the new gardener. Liam flinched, but quickly masked it with a tight smile. We inherited the property. Just following the instructions. Instructions, the butcher repeated, nodding slowly. They have very specific needs, those special cuts. Don't cheap out on them. She never did. He slid the package across the counter. As Liam reached for it, Silas the butcher spoke one last time, his voice dropping low. And remember the rule, young gardener. The garden only takes what the gardener willingly offers. She was very clear about that. Liam froze, pulling his hand back as if burned. What does that mean? Silas gave him a look of profound pity, the only emotional flicker Chloe had yet seen from him. It means you pay the bill, Mr. Carter. You pay the price. Always. They paid the invoice, a staggering price for specialty cuts, and left in a hurry, the heavy package cold and clammy between them. Back at the farmhouse, Chloe pleaded with Liam one last time. That man knew exactly what he was selling her. This isn't food, Liam. This is a ritual sacrifice. We walk away now. We lose the house, but we keep our lives. No, Liam said, his voice hard. He unwrapped the butcher paper, revealing the content. It wasn't a steak. It wasn't a roast. It was a dense, almost spherical mass of grayish-pink tissue, surrounded by bone fragments that had been meticulously bleached and ground into a rough powder. It looked like high-quality muscle tissue, but it possessed no discernible fat, and the scent, when the wrapping was fully peeled away, was faintly sweet and overpoweringly metallic. It pulsed faintly, cold to the touch. The catalyst, Liam breathed, picking up the bone meal powder. He worked with an almost religious fervor, consulting the ledger. He found a strange ceramic bowl and a set of silver instruments in the utility room, tools their grandmother had clearly used. Following the archaic instructions, he mixed the ground bone and the tissue mass with a small, precise quantity of his own blood, drawn with a ritualistic pinprick to his finger, a tiny, symbolic sacrifice. As the mixture was completed, Liam looked pale, exhausted by the meticulous labor, but utterly satisfied. He carried the bowl up to the humid, purple-lit attic, Chloe lingering reluctantly in the doorway. I have to do this alone, Chloe, Liam ordered, his eyes locked on the thriving, pulsing garden. The gardener must perform the offering. He approached the black, shimmering soil bed. The plants seemed to lean toward him, the fleshy, membranous petals of the central plant trembling rapidly. The rhythmic thumping increased in speed, now sounding like a desperate heart rhythm. Liam knelt, scooping handfuls of the viscous mixture onto the soil bed around the largest plants. The reaction was instantaneous and terrible. The black soil drank the mixture, sucking it down with a voracious, audible slurp. The plants shuddered, not with fear, but with ecstatic energy. The colors deepened. The reds became the shade of fresh arterial blood. The purple lights flared intensely. The bulbous, organ-shaped sacs began to inflate and deflate with violent speed. And then came the sound. The low sucking and thumping faded, replaced by a delicate, high-pitched chirping noise, like hundreds of satisfied baby birds. The atmosphere in the attic thickened, becoming almost narcotic. Liam stood up, throwing the empty bowl aside. The pallor was gone. He was radiant, vibrant, flushed with a powerful, electric surge of energy. His eyes were wide, clear, and intensely focused on the garden. He looked 10 years younger, all the stress lines around his mouth and eyes momentarily erased. "It works, Chloe," he breathed, the words heavy with awe and reverence. "It actually works. Look at the vitality." Chloe, watching from the threshold, felt a violent retching reflex. The energy that had rushed into Liam was a void in her. The sickness that had briefly lifted returned tenfold, coupled with a crushing headache and a chilling suspicion. The butcher had said, "The garden only takes what the gardener willingly offers." Liam had offered a symbolic drop of his blood. But the garden had just consumed something else, a sacrifice paid for by their grandmother, and now, it was drawing its return on investment not just from the fertilizer, but from the immediate vicinity. The vibrancy had rushed into Liam, but it had drained out of Chloe. The energy of the garden was not created, it was transferred. And now that Liam had taken charge, the garden had chosen its preferred source of latent vitality. The uninitiated, the unwilling, the sister who stood closest to the fortified door. The inheritance was a closed-loop system, and she was already beginning to realize she was the spare battery. Beneath it, Liam was merging with the root, becoming not just the gardener, but the guard. He wrenched the axe from her grip with impossible strength, not even looking at the weapon. His eyes remained locked on her, accusatory and terrifyingly vacant. "They won't let you," he whispered, his voice sounding like dry leaves rustling. "They need you to stay near. They need your reserve." He pushed her down the narrow staircase. She didn't fall. She slid down the stairs like a sack of clothes, landing painfully on the hall floor below. By the time she looked up, Liam was gone, retreating behind the steel door, sealing the fortress and resuming his vigilant service to the growing, hungry thing in the attic. Chloe was left alone in the cold hall, her body bruised, her energy utterly spent, her mind reeling from the realization that her brother was transforming into a kind of flesh and blood extension of the monstrous garden. The inheritance of hunger. The hunt in the house and the source of the feast. Chloe lay crumpled at the foot of the attic stairs. The smell of fear and musty would heavy in the air. Her body throbbed with the residual pain of the fall, but the true agony was the pervasive, cold emptiness that had settled in her core. Liam was not just consumed. He was functionally integrated into the garden's defense system. He was the sentinel protecting its energy source, and by extension, protecting his own rapidly accruing vitality. She knew she couldn't stay in the house. Liam's new, unnatural speed, that soundless glide, meant he could find her instantly. More critically, the elder Carter's ledger had warned that the garden needed its nearest kin for reserve, actively draining her whenever she was close. Her only chance was to leave the property entirely, seek help, and forfeit the inheritance. But as she struggled to her feet, a paralyzing thought struck her. The will itself. If she failed to adhere to the maintenance for 7 days, the house went to the American Association for Botanical Research, AABR. What if the AABR wasn't an academic institution, but merely the next link in the parasitic chain? What if Silas the butcher was delivering the specialty cuts to them too? She couldn't risk letting this monstrous entity be passed on. She had to destroy it, or at least expose its true nature. The key lay in the butcher's package. The catalyst wasn't just blood and bone meal. It was highly refined, dense tissue. Elara's ledger had mentioned fresh, dense, and non-toxic inputs that cost a fortune. Chloe needed to know what the tissue was, not just what was eaten, but who had provided it, and where the lineage truly began. She had to get out, but first, she needed the proof, the butcher's invoice, which was still in Liam's pocket. She crept into the kitchen, moving slowly, hugging the shadows. The house was silent, but the ambient humidity felt charged, as if the air itself was listening. She found Liam's utility jacket draped over a chair, near the discarded, bloody ceramic bowl used for mixing the fertilizer. As her fingers brushed the coarse fabric of the jacket, a sound made her freeze. A soft, scraping shush from the hallway, the sound of skin gliding over hardwood. Liam had not gone back to the attic. He was hunting her. She scrambled under the dining table just as Liam appeared in the kitchen doorway. His movements were eerily fluid. He wasn't walking, he was shifting, like water moving under ice. His head tilted slowly, his eyes scanning the room, not with human sight, but with the cold, comprehensive awareness of a predator seeking heat. He stopped directly beside the jacket. Chloe, pressed against the floorboards, held her breath until her lungs burned. She could see his bare feet, the skin unnaturally waxy, almost transparent, and she thought she saw a faint, red-purple luminescence beneath the surface, tracing what she realized must be his veins. He bent down, not to pick up the jacket, but to trace a finger across the floor where Chloe's shoe had scuffed the dust. His entire body rotated towards the table in one smooth, alarming motion. His tasting the air. His tracking my energy. Instinct took over. She lunged, snatching the jacket, and darted towards the back door, crashing through a stack of covered china in her haste. The noise was shattering. Liam roared, a dry, brittle sound that sounded like old wood splitting, and surged after her. She burst out of the back door and ran blindly into the dense, overgrown 50 acres of woodland. The trees were ancient, their branches skeletal, forming a canopy so thick that the midday sun barely pierced it. This was the family land, but it felt hostile, unforgiving. She didn't get far. Liam was faster, his hypervitality making a mockery of the terrain. Just as she cleared a thicket of thorns, he tackled her from behind, not with the force of an angry brother, but with the cold, efficient weight of stone. They crashed into the damp earth. He didn't try to hurt her, not physically. He merely held her down, his grip painfully strong, his face inches from hers. His lips were cracked and dry, and the whites of his eyes were faintly yellowed. "Stop wasting energy," he hissed, his breath odorless and cool. "The reserve is finite. You must conserve the charge." As his skin touched hers, the familiar drain intensified. Chloe felt her heartbeat flutter, her vision blurring at the edges. She felt the urge to submit, to simply lie there and let him take the energy until she became as inert as the dust. In a desperate, final effort, she twisted her wrist and jammed a sharp, splintered branch she had grabbed from the thicket into his arm, right where she had seen the purple tendril emerge earlier. Liam screamed, a terrible, non-human shriek of pure vegetal pain. He released her instantly, clutching his forearm. Where the branch had pierced his skin, a trickle of sap-like, thick, dark green fluid mixed with the blood. The wound sealed itself almost instantly, but the scream had bought her precious seconds. She didn't run further into the woods. She ran back towards the single point of contact with the outside world, the road. Gasping, she reached the car, slammed the door, and fumbled with the keys. The engine roared to life just as Liam emerged from the trees, standing at the edge of the lawn, perfectly still, watching her with the patience of a rooted thing. He made no move to follow. The garden needed him within its radius. Chloe drove straight back to the old mill butcher. Silas the butcher was cleaning a meat block with the same surgical precision as before. When Chloe, disheveled and bruised, slapped the crumpled invoice onto his counter, he merely looked up, his expression unreadable. "Elara's payment," he stated. "I told the boy. The garden only takes what the gardener willingly offers." "What is the specialty cut?" Chloe demanded, her voice raw. "The tissue, the bone meal. What kind of animal is it?" Silas sighed, a slow, heavy sound. "No animal, girl. Not anymore. Not for generations. It stopped being cattle 70 years ago." He leaned closer, resting his enormous hands on the counter. "It's a long tradition here in the valley. A family passes the debt. The butcher pays the bill for the family, but the family still pays the interest. Elara's payments kept her alive, kept the garden dormant. But she ran out of money, ran out of time. She couldn't pay the butcher's bill. The butcher's bill. The real catalyst, Silas said, lowering his voice until it was almost a hum. When the gardener can no longer pay for the cuts, the lineage offers its own. Elara paid the price in advance, for 3 cycles, with the only thing she had left. Her sister, her younger sister, who lived nearby until 2 years ago. The one who had no children, no debt of her own. Chloe felt the world tilt. Her grandmother had killed her great-aunt, killed her and had her processed, not to feed the plants, but to buy 3 more cycles of life for herself, and to pass the debt on to the next generation. Silas pointed to a small, nearly invisible entry at the bottom of the invoice. Initial payment. Carter, a final processing fee applied. That package the boy took? It was your great-aunt Abigail. Her life essence, processed into the catalyst to kickstart the new cycle. Your grandmother made the final payment, and now the root is stirring, asking for the next installment. That boy, your brother, is hooked on that borrowed vitality now. He won't stop until he replaces the next cut. No, Chloe whispered, shaking her head violently. I have to burn it. I have to call the police. Silas gave her the same look of cold pity he had given Liam. The police? Tell them what? That your brother is tending a garden made of your relatives? And if you burn it down, you kill the one who absorbed the most vitality, the gardener. And the root will reclaim the entire debt from the nearest living vessel. That would be you, girl. All of it. He offered a final, horrifying piece of advice, wiping his hands clean. The garden will go dormant if it lacks its specific sustenance for 7 days. But it needs to be starved from a distance. You need to keep the boy busy, keep him away from the house, and stop the next delivery. The next delivery is in 4 days, girl. And the next cut is you, or the boy's next kin. The garden doesn't care. It only needs the debt paid. Chloe turned and ran, the horror of her brother's transformation now dwarfed by the grotesque, multi-generational cannibalism that sustained the ancient root system. She had 4 days to neutralize Liam and starve the root, or she would become the butcher's next specialty cut. The inheritance of hunger. The starvation and the shadow line. Chloe drove until the farmhouse was a distant, forgotten speck, not stopping until she reached the safety of a gas station 10 miles away. She pulled into the corner of the parking lot and turned off the engine, sinking back into the seat. The intense, crippling weakness that had plagued her since entering the house instantly began to subside. The star-shaped bruises on her arm, though still visible, ceased their faint, painful throbbing. The realization was terrifyingly simple. The moment she crossed the property line, the parasitic tether was broken. The root couldn't reach her here. She had 4 days. 4 days until Silas the butcher made the next delivery, a delivery that would ensure the garden's continued existence and potentially solidify her own fate as the next catalyst. The goal was now clear. She had to neutralize Liam, force the garden into starvation-induced dormancy, and then find a way to destroy the entire structure before the forfeiture clause kicked in. The garden needed to starve. But if Liam remained in the attic, the garden would eventually begin to feed on him, as its history pages warned. It would draw down its own borrowed vitality, leaving him a husk for the next final payment. She had to get him out, and she had to keep him out. Chloe quickly formulated a reckless plan. She bought the strongest over-the-counter sleeping medication she could find, a high-dose antihistamine with powerful sedative effects. She also bought a small, sturdy length of marine-grade rope, ignoring the cashier's curious stare. She could not fight Liam's synthetic strength, but she could exploit his obsession. She drove back to the perimeter of the property, parking her car just past the point where the draining exhaustion began to creep back into her fingers. She walked the rest of the way, holding the bottle of pills and the rope, bracing herself against the returning cold ache. Liam was no longer standing in the yard. The house was utterly silent, but the oppressive, humid heat now seemed to leak from the boarded windows. Chloe went to the back of the house, to the woodshed, a sturdy, concrete-floored structure with a locking steel door, far enough from the main house to potentially disrupt the root's constant power transfer. She needed a way to lure him outside the fortress of the attic. She found an old, rusty gardening bucket and filled it with a dark, rich compost from the furthest corner of the shed, mixing it with some dried leaves. She crushed 3 of the sleeping pills into a fine powder and mixed it into the compost, then stirred in a small, symbolic amount of water. It was a crude, sedative-laced new fertilizer. Standing by the back door, she screamed Liam's name, her voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. "Liam, I found a new reserve. Something better than the butcher's cut. It's alive. It's growing." Silence. Then, the almost soundless shush of his body moving at impossible speed. He appeared in the doorway, his eyes darting to the bucket. He moved with a stiff, unnatural economy of movement. His jaw was clenched, and the translucent, waxy skin had spread, patches of it now visible on his neck, looking like polished driftwood. "Lies," he hissed, the papery texture of his voice worse than before. "The ledger is absolute. You are trying to starve them." "No, look." Chloe held out the bucket, keeping a safe distance. "This is natural decay, Liam. A stronger source. It's better than the old meat. It's pure life essence. We can free ourselves from the butcher." The reference to escaping the butcher was the trigger. Liam's eyes, though still furious, flickered with intense, scientific curiosity, the last vestiges of his human mind struggling against the garden's implanted dogma. He wanted freedom, even if it was synthetic. He took a cautious step forward, his body rigid. "Bring it closer. The root must inspect it." "No. It needs to be mixed outside the house," Chloe lied, backing towards the woodshed. "The air inside is corrupting it. We must follow a new process." Liam hesitated, torn between the garden's command to stay close and the obsessive desire for a superior input. The garden was hungry, chirping ceaselessly in his mind. The ledger offered rules, but also the promise of infinite vitality. Driven by his synthetic hunger, he finally glided out onto the grass towards her, his movements stiff and quick. As he reached the bucket, his concentration was entirely on the new compound. Chloe, with a burst of adrenaline, shoved the entire concoction directly into his face. The dark, damp compost stuck to his waxy skin, and the crushed pills powdered his eyes and nostrils. Liam inhaled sharply, the fine powder entering his system. He screamed, a raw, strangled sound, half human and half the sound of tearing vegetation. His movements became instantly jerky and uncoordinated. His hands shot to his face, clawing at the compost. "You are poisoning the soil," he shrieked, stumbling backwards. The powerful sedative, working on his accelerated, synthetic metabolism, hit him like a physical blow. He collapsed onto the lawn, twitching violently. Chloe seized the rope and, working fast despite the resurgence of the terrible weakness that now radiated from the garden, she secured his hands and feet, tethering him tightly. He was breathing shallowly, his face contorted in a silent, agonizing rage of thwarted hunger. She dragged his inert, strangely heavy body into the concrete woodshed, locked the reinforced steel door, and slumped against it, utterly depleted. Day 1. The starvation. The countdown began. With Liam secured outside the house, though still within the property line, Chloe focused on the garden itself. She returned to the main house. The scent of humid earth and raw meat was stronger now, mixed with a sickeningly sweet perfume of desperation. The absence of the gardener, the primary defense, had panicked the root. She spent the next 24 hours mapping the property, using the original ancestors' fragmented notes from the ledger. The notes repeatedly referenced a shadow line, the physical boundary where the soil began to shift, marking the effective radius of the ground god's influence. Out in the dense woodland, she found it. The forest floor was a mess of decaying leaves and needles, but at a specific radius, about 100 yards from the farmhouse foundation, the soil suddenly changed. On one side, it was normal forest loam. On the other, the soil was disturbingly dark, almost charcoal black, and unnaturally soft. The roots of the trees that crossed the line were thick, covered in a grayish-purple fungal coating that seemed to pulsate faintly. This was the shadow line, the physical perimeter of the root's territory. Any life form crossing the shadow line became part of the garden's passive energy reserve, just as the notes had described. The garden was not just in the attic. It was rooted deep beneath the house, stretching its influence across the 50 acres. Burning the house would only scorch the bloom. The root itself had to be poisoned or physically removed from the soil. She returned to the woodshed on the second day. Liam was awake. He was sitting upright, straining against the rope, but his movements were slower, heavier. The porcelain clarity of his skin had vanished, replaced by a feverish sweat and a pallor so profound he looked like unbaked clay. The borrowed vitality was rapidly being recalled. "Chloe," he rasped, his voice regaining a rough, familiar texture, stripped of its vegetal dryness. "The pain. It's inside me. The garden is screaming." He didn't mean that the garden was making noise. He meant the garden was communicating its agony through the symbiotic link he had forged with it. "Let me go," he begged, his eyes filling with real, human tears, the first emotion he had shown in days. "I need the attic. I need to feed them. If they drop below a vibrancy index of 1, the final payment is made. You're killing me, Chloe." "I'm saving you," she shot back, gripping the handle of the woodshed door. That vitality was a lie. It was Abigail's life, and it was draining mine. "You need to let it all go, Liam. Let the garden starve." As she spoke, Liam's facial features seemed to harden. The skin on his cheekbones tightened, losing all elasticity, and the thin, purple tendrils she had seen earlier began to snake visibly beneath the surface of his forearm where the rope bit into his flesh. His joints stiffened, forcing his limbs into awkward, rigid angles. He wasn't just hungry, he was physically reverting, the plant-like material he had absorbed fighting to escape the confines of his human form. He lunged forward, the rope stretching taut, the tendons in his neck bulging. "There is no saving us. There is only the payment. If I cannot feed them, they will take the reserve. They will find you, Chloe. They will pull you back to the soil." His voice ended in a strangled, desperate cry, and a new patch of waxy, translucent skin erupted on his wrist, a clear sign that his body was rapidly turning into the hard, chitinous defense system of the root. Chloe slammed the shed door shut and locked it with a heavy steel bar. She had 2 days left until the next delivery. Liam was breaking down, and the root was panicking, attempting to reassert control over its gardener. She needed to find the ultimate poison, something powerful enough to kill a centuries-old subterranean entity, before Liam completely lost his humanity and the garden found a way to reach her through the shadow line.